Something significant is unfolding far from Washington. Yet its consequences may extend far beyond the Caribbean. Recent U.S. actions involving oil shipments are no longer confined to Venezuela alone. They are now intersecting with broader global interests. When energy security, sanctions policy, and major powers converge, the situation becomes far more complex than it first appears. Recent reporting suggests that some of the affected oil shipments were bound for China. That detail matters. It reframes the issue from a regional sanctions matter into a global strategic question. This is no longer just about enforcement. It is about access to energy, limits of power, and how influence is exercised beyond national borders. Analysts are now watching this development closely. Not because it represents a sudden crisis, but because it highlights underlying tensions that have been building for years. Energy flows, trade routes, and political authority are increasingly intertwined. And events in one region can quickly create ripple effects elsewhere. Understanding this moment requires stepping back and examining the broader context. Sanctions are a long-standing tool of U.S. foreign policy. They are designed to apply economic pressure without direct military engagement. In the case of Venezuela, sanctions target key revenue streams, particularly oil exports. The goal, according to U.S. officials, is to influence political behavior through financial restriction rather than force. Oil remains one of the most strategically important commodities in the global economy. It underpins transportation, manufacturing, and energy production worldwide. Disruptions to oil supply do not remain local. They affect pricing, insurance, logistics, and political relationships across regions. This is why even limited enforcement actions can attract international attention. China is the world's largest energy importer. Ensuring stable and diversified supply is a central pillar of its long-term strategy. Over time, Beijing has sought to reduce reliance on any single region. This includes investments in energy projects across Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. Energy security for China is inseparable from economic stability. Chinese companies have invested billions in Venezuela's energy sector over the years. Despite sanctions, trade has continued through adjusted channels. From Beijing's perspective, these relationships are commercial and strategic. They are not viewed as political gestures. When shipments linked to these investments face disruption, the issue becomes immediate and tangible. The Caribbean is more than a regional waterway. It is a critical corridor connecting energy producers, shipping routes, and major markets. Historically, the region has held strategic importance for the United States. Developments here are rarely viewed in isolation. They are often interpreted through broader security and influence considerations. Sanctions enforcement at sea is complex. It requires legal authority, trained personnel, and precise coordination. Unlike traditional military operations, these actions fall under law enforcement frameworks. Timing matters. So does the availability of specialized teams capable of operating in challenging maritime conditions. One reported incident drew attention to these challenges. A sanctioned vessel delayed compliance for an extended period. Sources indicated that additional resources were required before further action could proceed. Analysts noted that such delays do not reflect overall power. Instead, they highlight the practical limits of sustained enforcement. In international politics, perception matters. How actions are interpreted can be as important as the actions themselves. Even short delays can shape expectations. They may encourage adaptation or resistance elsewhere. This is why enforcement capacity is often discussed not only in terms of strength, but consistency. Chinese officials have criticized what they describe as the extraterritorial application of U.S. law. This refers to enforcement actions affecting foreign companies beyond U.S. territory. Washington argues that access to its markets and financial systems requires compliance. Beijing disputes this interpretation. At its core, this is a legal and political disagreement about authority. This debate extends beyond two countries. Global trade relies on predictability. When enforcement actions affect international shipping, uncertainty increases. Insurance premiums rise. Shipping routes adjust. Markets respond. These effects can accumulate even without large-scale disruption. Some analysts view recent actions as part of a broader strategic message, not directed at one country alone, but at how influence is exercised within certain regions. This interpretation remains debated. However, it reflects how enforcement measures are often read through geopolitical lenses rather than narrow policy terms. From Washington's perspective, sanctions enforcement is a legitimate policy tool. From Beijing's perspective, it represents overreach. Both views coexist. Neither side fully accepts the other's framework. This divergence increases friction, especially when economic and strategic interests overlap. The international system is increasingly multipolar. Economic power is distributed across several major actors. This complicates enforcement and compliance. Actions taken by one state can prompt responses from others. Coordination becomes harder. Disagreements become more visible. Energy markets are highly sensitive to perceived risk. Even limited uncertainty can influence pricing behavior. Traders factor in potential disruption. Insurers reassess exposure. Shipping companies adjust schedules. These reactions occur quickly, often before any material change in supply. So far, responses have remained largely diplomatic. Statements, protests, and official comments have dominated. This reflects a shared interest in avoiding escalation. At the same time, diplomacy does not remove underlying tensions. It often manages them temporarily rather than resolving them fully. Policy approaches can evolve. Enforcement priorities may shift based on cost, effectiveness, and reaction. Economic responses may replace direct confrontation. These adjustments are common in complex policy environments. They reflect adaptation rather than retreat. The most significant risk remains misjudgment. When multiple actors operate under different assumptions, mistakes can occur. A routine action can be interpreted as escalation. Communication gaps matter. This is why analysts emphasize caution, especially in contested environments. Other countries are observing closely. Not because they are directly involved, but because the outcome sets expectations. How enforcement is applied, how it is challenged, and how disputes are managed. These observations influence future decisions elsewhere. This episode fits into a longer pattern. Energy, trade, and geopolitics are becoming increasingly interconnected. Economic tools are used alongside diplomatic and strategic ones. Boundaries between policy areas are less clear. This trend is unlikely to reverse in the near future. Ultimately, this situation is about more than one country or one shipment. It highlights how power is exercised, tested, and interpreted in today's global system. Sanctions exist. So do limits. How those limits are managed will shape future interactions. Not only in the Caribbean, but across global trade and energy networks. This is why analysts continue to monitor developments closely. Not for dramatic change overnight, but for gradual shifts in behavior, policy, and expectation. In a world where economic security and political influence increasingly overlap, even small actions can carry lasting significance.